What happens to our mind when we are attached to our sensory experience? Let's find out what the greatest spiritual story ever told has to say about overcoming our sensory experience. Overcoming sensory experience is something constantly reinforced in our mind in the great text of the Ashtavakra Gita. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the Ashtavakra Gita, this is what is known as a nididhyasana text, a text for those who are on the cusp of enlightenment or beyond the pale of enlightenment. All throughout the text, it is speaking about the nature of bondage, liberation, and overcoming sensory experience. Now, in previous chapters, we've discussed the internal aspect of bondage and liberation. And in this chapter, we speak about the external perspective, sensory experience itself. And so I want to read to you a very important verse on the nature of sensory experience in relation to both bondage and liberation. It is bondage when the mind is attached to any sense experience. It is liberation when the mind is detached from all sense experiences. The essence of bondage and liberation can be summed up by two different perspectives. Bondage is the identification with either internal or external stimuli, whereas liberation is a dissociation to internal and external stimuli. And so the way we are trained is we follow our likes and our dislikes according to our conditioning, right? And so our whole sensory experience is geared that way. We will seek the next pleasurable experience and avoid pain at all costs. And look, there's nothing wrong with that per se, but for spiritual growth, if all you are doing is pursuing pleasure, then all you are doing is building this illusory reality where you follow what you like and what your subjective viewpoint thinks is good for you. And so then we find ourselves on this hedonic treadmill where we're trying to chase pleasurable experience after pleasurable experience while we may be accumulating a lot of pain and suffering on the way. And so then all we do is we pile up more pleasurable experiences on top of this pain that we are trying to avoid. And all that happens is eventually the dam will burst. And this is what leads to a lot of psychological problems with people where they continually trying to avoid pain and suffering by overlaying them with pleasurable experiences rather than knowledge, which is what we are talking about here today, because knowledge is the key to overcoming pain and suffering because you're understanding reality from the highest perspective. So the opposite to that is liberation, where we are free from our subjective viewpoint. And so we're not chasing the next pleasurable experience. We see reality for what it is. And then we allow the world to happen to us rather than us going and seeking a pleasurable experience or seeking the experience that we want, right? So we might love chocolate cake and all we do is seek chocolate cake, and eventually this is detrimental to your health. And so it's not a positive thing to chase just because you like chocolate cake, right? We all love chocolate cake, I'm assuming, but we can't eat chocolate cake breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This is only going to lead to all sorts of health problems. And so when we're more observant of our sensory experience externally, then this actually contributes to being more healthy and actually facilitates an environment that is more conducive for spiritual growth for yourself. Because you're not chasing all of these sensory experiences. And you're not saying that, oh, I'm the non-dual Brahman anyway, I can just eat whatever I want. There's a lot of these non-dual New Age interpretations in the world which have only come about since the Eastern spiritual traditions went west. But if you go to the core of where all these traditions came from, obviously people don't overanalyze everything. And obviously it's just naturally better to be healthy and not be a victim of your own external sensory experiences. So it's better to have viveka, have discernment, and understand how you are bound to these sensory experiences, these likes and dislikes that you have, according, in most cases, to our palate and our unsteady mind, right? This is, again, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, this is chitta, vritti, nirodha again, where the chitta, the mind stuff, the mind activity, and vritti, the whirlpool of mind, is causing you to be agitated and seek the next experience, not just internally, but also externally. And so there's no chance for nirodha, no chance for settling or stilling of the mind. And so it's only when we can embody nirodha that we can see clearly our desires for what we find pleasurable according to our conditioning. Now, in Sanskrit, there's drishti. In this context, drishti means seeing any sensory experience, not just internally, but also externally. So, internally, we are trying to reveal the conditioned perspective that actually has all of these attractions to these sensory experiences in the external world. And so when you couple them together, you become more observant of your agitated mind. And the more you are observant of that, the less you will be attracted to chasing those sensory experiences, because you're starting to become aware of how agitated your mind is to follow the next experience, to seek the next pleasurable experience. And so as Ashtavakra says here, liberation is when we are detached from all sensory experience, when we have the dissociative perspective, as I mentioned earlier, rather than being identified with it, right? We can be identified with loving chocolate cake, but you can also be dissociated from that perspective. And then maybe you'll eat less chocolate cake, or you might not even eat chocolate cake at all, because you are completely dissociated from the desires that have been inculcated within you, which makes your jiva, your persona system, your ego identify with these likes and dislikes. And so to sum it all up, we need to cultivate indifference and dissociation with the sensory experiences that we are experiencing. And Ashtavakra goes on about this all through the Ashtavakra Gita, where he is advising us to dissociate from reality, dissociate from the sensory experiences. Not in a dissociative psychological perspective, but seeing it, right? You build a gap between what the jiva has been conditioned with, but you come back into the heart of existence, which is Atman, the undifferentiated consciousness, which is identical with Brahman. And when you abide as the Atman, you can see the jiva for what it is. All it is a temporary illusion, a temporary wave on the great ocean of Brahman. Shanti, shanti, shanti.